Regina Williams clutched her hospital ID badge as her heart thundered against her ribs. The emergency room doors slid open before her, but Head of Security James Patterson's steely gaze made the familiar entrance feel like a barrier. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance as she watched him move toward her, his hand already reaching for his radio. Even after 15 years as one of Mercy General's most respected trauma surgeons, she was about to learn that credentials don't always shield you from prejudice. At New Real Life Stories, we believe in exposing moments when discrimination collides with destiny, and tonight's story reveals how a routine hospital shift transformed into a confrontation that would reshape medical institutions across America. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Regina's face as she moved through the pristine corridors of Mercy General's newly renovated West Wing. Her scrubs rustled softly with each step, a sound that usually brought comfort, but now seemed to draw unwanted attention. The weight of countless eyes followed her movements, Patterson's surveillance becoming more obvious with each passing moment. If you've ever felt the sting of being judged before proving your worth, stay with us, because this story isn't just about one doctor's struggle. It's about a system that needs emergency surgery of its own. Despite being the youngest doctor ever appointed to head Mercy General's trauma unit, Regina felt Patterson's suspicion pierce through her professional armor. His walkie-talkie crackled unnecessarily loud in the quiet corridor. "Keep an eye on the woman in purple scrubs," he muttered, seemingly forgetting that she'd performed life-saving surgery on his own nephew just months ago. Something's not right about her timing. The irony wasn't lost on Regina. In less than 20 minutes, she was scheduled to lead a groundbreaking procedure that would be broadcast to teaching hospitals across the country. A procedure that could revolutionize emergency trauma care in underserved communities. Yet here she stood, watched like an intruder in the very hospital she'd helped transform into a leading trauma center. If you believe in standing against injustice in all its forms, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Together, we're building a community that demands change through powerful stories like Regina's. The observation room is ready, Dr. Williams. Sarah Chen, her favorite resident, called out, her voice warm with admiration. But Patterson's sudden movement cut through their exchange, his hand moving to his belt as he stepped closer. Sarah's smile faltered, her eyes darting between them before she quietly backed away. Confusion etched across her features. Regina squared her shoulders, a gesture familiar from countless hours in the operating room. Her fingers, the same ones that had delicately repaired shattered bodies and restored countless lives, curled into fists at her sides. The same fingers that had written revolutionary papers on emergency trauma care were now viewed as potential weapons. As she paused by the nurse's station to review her patient's latest vitals, voices drifted from around the corner. "Watch her carefully," Patterson instructed another guard. "Been here since 4 a.m. Nobody starts their shift that early unless they're up to something." Regina's hands stilled on the medical chart, her surgeon's fingers trembling slightly as she processed their words. If they had bothered to check the schedule, they'd know she'd been preparing for today's groundbreaking surgery since before dawn. The hospital's state-of-the-art monitors beeped steadily around her as she moved toward the surgical floor, where a team of the country's top trauma specialists waited to assist her. Medical students and residents lined the hallways, their tablets ready to take notes on what should have been a historic moment in trauma care. Yet even this ordinary act of walking toward her operating room sparked Patterson's heightened vigilance. "Ma'am, stop right there." His command sliced through the professional hum of hospital activity like a scalpel through tissue. The medical students froze, their tablets suspended mid-note, their expressions a familiar mixture of shock and studied indifference. Some quickly became absorbed in their phones, while others simply turned away, embracing the age-old tradition of ignoring uncomfortable truths. "On what grounds?" Regina's voice carried the same steady authority she used when commanding her surgical team through complex procedures. Years of handling life-and-death situations had taught her the value of remaining calm under pressure. "I have a revolutionary procedure scheduled to begin in 15 minutes. A procedure that could save countless lives." Patterson's face hardened, skepticism etched into every line. "We've had reports of unauthorized personnel accessing restricted areas." Real doctors don't arrive at 4 a.m. without prior authorization. His hand moved toward her ID badge, but Regina took a precise step backward, maintaining the space between them with the same precision she used in the operating theater. The tension in the air thickened as hospital staff began to gather, their phones now recording the unfolding scene. A young nurse, her stethoscope hanging limply around her neck, started to step forward but hesitated, caught in that eternal moment between moral obligation and self-preservation. The hospital's chief of medicine, Dr. Marcus Thompson, emerged from his office, his face draining of color as he assessed the situation unfolding in his carefully managed hospital. Regina reached for her phone, her movements precise and controlled, just as they were in the operating room. A quick glance confirmed what she already knew. The incoming trauma helicopter was less than 10 minutes away, carrying a patient who needed the very procedure Patterson was now delaying. The same procedure that could revolutionize emergency care for thousands of patients who couldn't afford to reach major trauma centers in time. The growing crowd of medical personnel pressed closer, their whispers echoing off the sterile walls. This was more than just another incident of profiling. This was about to become a matter of life and death. And Regina knew, with the same certainty that guided her hands through the most complex surgeries, that what happened next would either break or heal more than just one hospital's toxic culture. The steady thrum of helicopter blades cut through the tense silence, growing louder with each passing second. Regina's hand moved to her pocket, where she kept the small photo of her first trauma patient, a reminder of why she'd chosen this path. Through the hospital's towering windows, the approaching medevac helicopter's searchlight pierced the early morning darkness, illuminating Patterson's face in harsh bursts of white light. "I won't ask again." Patterson's voice carried an edge of threatened authority. "Show me additional verification of your credentials." His hand now rested on his weapon, the absurdity of the situation growing with each precious second lost. Behind him, the gathered crowd of medical professionals shifted uncomfortably, their collective silence becoming its own form of complicity. If you believe in the power of truth to save lives, subscribe now. Only those who choose silence in the face of injustice would scroll past without joining our mission for change. What you're asking for isn't just unnecessary, it's dangerous, Regina stated, her voice carrying the weight of countless life and death decisions. That helicopter carries a 17-year-old trauma victim with minutes to live. Every second you delay me puts their life at risk. The steady beeping of monitors around them seemed to emphasize the urgency of each passing moment. Sarah Chan stepped forward again, her residence badge catching the fluorescent light. "She's Dr. Regina Williams," she announced, her voice trembling but determined. "She literally wrote the protocol we're about to perform. Her picture is on the wall of distinguished physicians right behind you." But Patterson's stance only grew more rigid, his judgment seemingly reinforced by this challenge to his authority. "Standard security procedures don't make exceptions," he insisted, reaching for Regina's arm. "Even if there's an emergency." The irony of his words hung heavy in the air, procedures designed to protect patients becoming the very thing that endangered them. Dr. Thompson finally found his voice, stepping forward with the delayed urgency of someone realizing too late the magnitude of their mistake. "Patterson, this is ridiculous. Dr. Williams is our head of trauma surgery." But Regina raised her hand, silencing him with the same authority she commanded in the operating room. "No, Marcus, let's address this." Her voice cut through the space like a precision instrument. "Because while you're apologizing to me, how many other medical professionals in this hospital face the same treatment without the protection of my position? How many patients suffer while their doctors and nurses are questioned based on nothing but prejudice?" The helicopter's sound grew deafening as it approached the landing pad. Through the windows, Regina could see the medical team rushing across the rooftop, their movements urgent with the knowledge that every second counted. The young patient's life hung in the balance, becoming an unwitting testament to the cost of unchecked bias. "You want verification?" Regina's voice remained steady as she pulled up her phone. "Here's my surgical fellowship certificate. Here's my board certification. Here's my Harvard Medical School diploma." Each swipe of her finger revealed another achievement, another barrier broken. But what I don't have is time to prove my right to save a life. The crowd had grown larger, phones recording what would soon become a viral testament to institutional racism in healthcare. A group of young residents, diverse faces who had looked up to Regina as a mentor and pioneer, watched with a mixture of anger and recognition, seeing their own future challenges reflected in her present struggle. The patient is female, 17, victim of a high-speed collision. A voice crackled over the hospital intercom. Multiple internal injuries, requiring immediate specialized trauma intervention. For minutes to arrival, the urgency of the situation seemed to hang in the air like a physical presence, pushing against Patterson's wall of prejudice. Regina's next words carried the precision of a surgeon's blade. So make your choice now, Patterson. Either arrest me and explain to the board why a 17-year-old girl died while you were questioning the credentials of the only surgeon in the state qualified to perform this procedure, or step aside and let me do my job. From the gathered crowd, another voice rose, Dr. James Martinez, a senior cardiologist who had worked alongside Regina for a decade. I'll vouch for Dr. Williams, he stated firmly, then added with deliberate emphasis. Not that she needs it, but since we're apparently requiring multiple forms of identification today, I'm formally confirming her identity. Patterson's face flushed as more voices joined in, nurses, technicians, residents, each adding their confirmation of Regina's identity. The absurdity of requiring one of the hospital's most renowned surgeons to be vouched for by multiple colleagues while a life hung in the balance seemed to finally penetrate his consciousness. If you believe that saving lives should take precedence over prejudice, join our community of subscribers now. Together, we can ensure these stories reach those who need to hear them most. The helicopter's landing skids touched down on the rooftop with a distant thud that seemed to reverberate through the building. Regina could picture the scene above them, the medical team rushing to transfer the patient, precious seconds ticking away, a young life balanced on the edge of survival. Each moment lost to Patterson's baseless suspicion decreased the chances of a successful outcome. I've performed over 3,000 trauma surgeries in this hospital, Regina stated, her words measured and precise. I've trained half the surgeons on this floor. That photo behind you, the one you're standing in front of while questioning my right to be here, that's me receiving the National Medal of Excellence in Trauma Surgery. And right now, there's a 17-year-old girl being rushed down from that helicopter who needs the procedure I pioneered. The elevator doors at the end of the hall dinged open, revealing the trauma team rushing toward them with the patient. The girl's face was barely visible among the tubes and medical equipment, but Regina caught a glimpse of someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's friend, her life now caught in the crossfire of institutional prejudice. Sarah Chen's voice cracked as she called out the patient's dropping vitals, the numbers painting an increasingly dire picture. The young resident's eyes darted between Regina and Patterson, silently pleading for an end to this dangerous standoff. The security guard's hand had moved away from his weapon, but his stance still blocked the path to the operating room. Regina took a step forward, her next words carrying the weight of every barrier she'd ever broken, every life she'd saved despite the odds. The question isn't whether I belong in that operating room, Patterson. The question is whether you're prepared to let your prejudice become the reason a 17-year-old girl doesn't make it home to her family. The trauma team was almost upon them now, the squeaking wheels of the gurney growing louder with each passing second. Regina could see the girl's vital signs continuing to deteriorate on the portable monitor. She knew, with the certainty born from years of experience, that they were running out of time. Time seemed to crystallize in that moment, the gurney's wheels squeaking against polished floors, the steady drop of the patient's vital signs marking each precious second lost. Patterson's face locked in an internal struggle between pride and duty. Then something shifted in the air, a change as subtle yet significant as the first signs of healing in a critical patient. BP dropping to 80/40, Sarah Chun called out, her voice cutting through the tension. O2 sats falling. The numbers told a story Regina had seen too many times. A young life slipping away while institutional barriers stood firm. But this time would be different. This time, the barriers would break. Move, Regina's command carried 15 years of saving lives against impossible odds. She stepped forward, her surgical authority radiating with such force that Patterson instinctively shifted aside. Sarah, Prepper 3. Martinez, I need you to assist. This just became a dual trauma cardiac procedure. The crowd parted like water as Regina strode toward the operating room, her focus now entirely on the dying teenager before her. The security guard's prejudice, the watching phones, the systemic discrimination. All of it faded against the imperative to save a life. This was where Regina truly belonged, where her hands could speak louder than any credential. If you believe that excellence knows no color, subscribe to our channel now. Together, we're building a future where talent triumphs over prejudice. Inside the OR, Regina moved with practiced precision, her team falling into step around her like a well-choreographed dance. Multiple internal injuries, she announced, her voice steady through her surgical mask. We'll be implementing the Williams protocol, the same procedure that, just minutes ago, Patterson had almost prevented her from performing. Hours passed in that timeless space that only surgeons know, where life and death dance on the edge of a scalpel. Regina's hands moved with the certainty of someone who had broken barriers not just for herself, but for every patient who needed care beyond the boundaries of prejudice. The gallery above the OR filled with medical students and staff, watching as history unfolded in more ways than one. Cardiac rhythm stabilizing, Martinez announced, his voice carrying a note of triumph. The modified procedure is working. The procedure Regina had developed, the one that would have been delayed by bias if she hadn't stood her ground, was saving this young girl's life in real time. As Regina completed the final sutures, she knew this day would resonate far beyond one patient, one hospital, one moment. The recording of her confrontation with Patterson had already gone viral, sparking a national conversation about discrimination in healthcare. But here, in the OR, all that mattered was the steady beep of the heart monitor and the rise and fall of her patient's chest. 6 months later, Regina stood at a podium in Mercy General's main auditorium, addressing a room full of hospital administrators, security personnel, and medical staff from across the country. The young trauma patient, now fully recovered, sat in the front row beside her parents, a living testament to the cost of unchecked bias and the power of standing firm. Healthcare excellence knows no color, no gender, no boundaries, Regina declared, her voice carrying the same authority that had moved Patterson aside that fateful morning. Yet every day, medical professionals face barriers that have nothing to do with their skills and everything to do with preconceptions. The hospital had undergone a transformation in those 6 months. Patterson hadn't been fired at Regina's insistence. Instead, he'd become part of the solution, helping to develop new security protocols that prioritized both safety and dignity. His personal journey from confrontation to collaboration became part of the hospital's mandatory training program. Sarah Chun, now leading her own research project on healthcare disparities, stood proudly among the new generation of doctors Regina had inspired. The incident had sparked a movement within medical institutions nationwide, with hospitals re-examining their security practices and implicit bias training. That morning showed us something crucial, Regina continued, gesturing to the screens behind her displaying data from her latest research. When we let bias delay care, we don't just hurt individuals. We betray the very essence of medicine itself. Every minute spent questioning a qualified professional's right to be there is a minute stolen from patient care. The young trauma patient, Emma Carter, rose shakily to her feet, her surgical scars hidden beneath her clothes but her gratitude visible in her eyes. Dr. Williams didn't just save my life, she announced, her voice strong despite her lingering recovery. She showed us all what happens when we let prejudice stand in the way of purpose. In the back of the auditorium, Patterson listened, his security badge now bearing a new designation, Chief of Healthcare Security Integration. His transformation had become as much a part of Mercy General's story as Regina's stand. Together, they had developed a new model for hospital security that was being adopted across the country. Regina's phone buzzed softly, another hospital requesting her presence at their bias training program. The Williams protocol had become more than just a surgical procedure. It was now shorthand for standing firm against discrimination in healthcare. Medical schools were incorporating her story into their ethics courses, teaching future doctors about the day prejudice almost claimed a young life. But this isn't just about one morning, one patient, or one doctor. Regina continued, her words reaching through the auditorium and into the live stream being watched by medical professionals worldwide. This is about creating a healthcare system where excellence is the only credential that matters, where every professional can focus on saving lives instead of proving their right to be there. Emma's parents dabbed at their eyes as Regina described the ripple effects of that morning. Their daughter's near tragedy had catalyzed changes across the medical establishment, forcing institutions to confront the deadly cost of unchecked bias. Hospitals nationwide had begun tracking and addressing incidents of discrimination, creating clear protocols for challenging unfair treatment. Dr. Thompson, who had initially stood silent during the confrontation, now led the hospital's newly formed Committee for Inclusive Excellence. His own journey from passive observer to active advocate illustrated how crisis could catalyze change. "We almost lost two things that morning," he admitted during the panel discussion. "A young life and our moral compass." Dr. Williams saved both. The Williams Foundation, established in the wake of the incident, now provided scholarships to minority medical students and funded research into healthcare disparities. Regina's stand had transformed from a moment of confrontation into a movement for lasting change. As Regina concluded her presentation, she held up the small photo she'd carried in her pocket that fateful morning, her first trauma patient from 15 years ago. "This reminder of why I became a surgeon almost didn't matter because of how I look. How many other healers have been delayed, deterred, or denied because of similar prejudice? How many patients have suffered while qualified professionals proved their right to help?" The changes rippled beyond Mercy General. Other hospitals began examining their security practices, implementing training programs that balance safety with respect. Medical conferences added sessions on addressing institutional bias, with Regina's story serving as a powerful case study in the cost of discrimination and the value of standing firm. Sarah Chun, speaking at a national medical student conference, summed it up perfectly. "Dr. Williams taught us that sometimes saving lives means having the courage to challenge the systems that endanger them. Whether those threats come from physical trauma or institutional bias, our duty as healers remains the same." As our time with this story draws to a close, Regina's impact continues to grow. Every patient who receives care from a doctor who might once have been delayed by prejudice, every medical professional who can focus on healing instead of proving their credentials, every institution that chooses to examine its practices, all of these represent the ongoing power of one person's refusal to let bias override excellence. In the end, the most powerful medicine proved to be truth. Truth spoken firmly in the face of prejudice. Truth backed by excellence. Truth that refuses to be delayed when lives hang in the balance. Regina's story reminds us that sometimes the most important surgeries are the ones we perform on our institutions, cutting away the cancer of bias to allow healing to begin. Thank you for joining us for another real-life story. Remember, change happens when we refuse to let prejudice stand unchallenged, when we recognize that every moment spent proving our right to be there is a moment stolen from those we could be helping. Together, we're not just sharing stories, we're saving lives. One truth at a time.